Welcome back to the Deep Dive, where we take your current understanding of a complex topic, put a flashlight on the footnotes, and show you exactly where the cutting edge of science is rewriting the textbooks.
And today we are really getting into one of those topics.
We are strapping in for the long haul. We're talking about the science of seasonal heterothermy, better known to most of us as hibernation.
And if your mental image of hibernation is still that classic cartoon squirrel simply taking a 5-month nap, prepare for a serious paradigm shift. We're deep diving into a physiological state that is far more radical and far more complex than simple sleep. It's an active metabolic suppression that fundamentally changes the rules of biology.
In environments you'd least expect, too.
Often, yes.
Okay, so let's unpack this immediately. The traditional cozy image of hibernation is all based on winter, deep cold, and a body temperature plummeting close to freezing. But our sources, the articles and research you brought to the table, they suggest we need a new definition. What is the fundamental mechanism we're really talking about here?
At its core, hibernation is just this elegant, radical energy conservation strategy. It's a state of minimal activity and metabolic reduction.
Characterized by what exactly?
Well, you're looking at low body temperature, dramatically slowed heart and breathing rates, and just an overall depression of the metabolic rate. The function is simple. Survive.
Survive when food runs out.
Exactly. Survive when environmental conditions. And that's usually defined by resource scarcity, not just cold make life unsustainable.
And the crucial distinction here is moving away from temperature as the sole marker and really focusing on the underlying engineering.
Precisely. The field has redefined the term based on active metabolic suppression, not necessarily the absolute drop in body temperature.
Okay, that's the key pivot.
It is. And it allows us to view hibernation as a continuum. You have short daily torpor, where a hummingbird might dip its metabolism overnight, all the way up to the months-long shutdowns we see in bears and ground squirrels.
So they're all using a similar toolkit.
They're all utilizing similar fundamental pathways to, turn down the biological thermostat.
It's the difference between tapping the brakes and turning off the engine entirely. An endothermic animal, one that generates its own heat, actively decides to lower its energy expenditure.
Yes. It sacrifices its hard-won ability to maintain a steady, high internal temperature.
Because the energy cost of finding food is just too high.
That's the metabolic commitment. They are temporarily disabling their costly endothermy. Depending on the species, this physiological shutdown can last from just hours to over half a year.
And the preparation is legendary. I mean, they either become hyperphagic.
Right, eating vast amounts to store fat.
Or they meticulously cache massive amounts of food for, periodic use.
And some, like female black bears, are hibernating while gestating. That alone suggests an almost impossible level of physiological control.
It's mind-boggling. They're fueling new life purely through stored resources, maintaining a warm core for the cubs, and still losing maybe 15 to 27% of their body mass by the time they emerge.
It is a phenomenal balancing act.
Right.
It requires the body to perfectly regulate resource allocation, ensuring that the necessary warmth and nutrients reach the fetus, while the rest of the body is in this deep shutdown.
So our mission today, then, is to explore this complex spectrum, to understand the surprising technical distinctions that separate these deep hibernators.
And to look at the rule-breaking cases.
The bears and the tropical lemurs, yeah. The ones that force science to abandon the old temperature rules.
And finally, look at how researchers are racing to steal these physiological secrets to induce hibernation in humans.
For trauma medicine and deep space exploration, a huge topic.
It really is. So to start, we have to categorize these champions of metabolic economy. Let's talk about the difference between being programmed to hibernate and choosing to hibernate.
Let's do it. The two main camps in mammals, obligate versus facultative.
Obligate hibernators are the ones who adhere to a strict internal schedule. They enter the hibernation state spontaneously, annually, often regardless of external factors like temperature or food access.
So it's a clock. An internal biological clock just triggers the shutdown.
It does. These are your traditional deep hibernators. Many ground squirrels, European hedgehogs, marmots.
And this is the state where the body temperature really plummets, right? Getting within a degree or two of the ambient temperature of their burrow. It's a near-death state.
It is. And this is where the mystery really deepens. The periodic euthermic arousals.
The what now?
Despite the immense energy saving of being cold, obligate hibernators frequently wake up. They restore their normal high body temperature, that's the for 12 to 24 hours before plunging back into torpor.
Okay, I have to challenge this, just based on the energy equation. If the whole point is conservation, why would evolution design a system that requires the animal to spend, what, maybe 80% of its entire hibernation energy budget just warming up and cooling down over and over?
It seems wildly inefficient.
It does.
And that is the precise question that has vexed biologists for decades.
Yeah.
We have multiple competing hypotheses. One major theory suggests it's about restoring homeostatic imbalances. Perhaps certain toxins or metabolic byproducts build up in the cold state, and they need a full-body warm-up to clear them out.
Like rebooting a computer that's gotten bogged down.
Exactly. Another extremely compelling hypothesis, and this is supported by research on the Arctic ground squirrel, is the sleep debt theory.
A sleep debt? While they're hibernating.
Right. During the cold state, they're metabolically suppressed, but they aren't achieving adequate restorative sleep. So when they warm up, they exhibit increased slow-wave activity, the deep, restorative part of non-REM sleep.
So they're waking up to sleep better.
It suggests they're using the arousal period to catch up on crucial sleep they missed while they were cold. It's a powerful testament to the fundamental importance of sleep.
That's amazing.
It is. And crucially, there's also the immune system hypothesis.
Ah.
Immune function, especially your T-cell response, it requires a high body temperature to operate effectively. So it's thought that these periodic arousals are necessary to, patrol the system, launch an effective immune response, and repair any damage before going back into that metabolically vulnerable cold state.
So it's a complex trade-off. You spend massive energy now to prevent a catastrophic system's failure later.
Exactly. And speaking of catastrophe avoidance, the Arctic ground squirrel is the king of extreme hibernation. Its physiological feat of freeze avoidance is just astounding.
This is the animal that sustains sub-zero temperatures in its core. How is that even possible without lethal ice crystals forming?
This is truly breathtaking level of biological control. This squirrel can maintain abdominal temperatures as low as -2.9 degrees Celsius.
That's 26.8 degrees Fahrenheit.
And sustain that for over 3 weeks at a time. And the sources highlight they avoid freezing solid through highly localized thermal regulation.
So they're creating thermal zones within their own body.
Exactly. They maintain the temperatures in their head and neck regions strategically at 0 degrees Celsius or above. They achieve this using selective vasoconstriction and vasodilation, essentially managing blood flow to create a thermal gradient.
So the head, the brain, is protected from the worst of the cold, while the rest of the body can hover below freezing.
It's an active process of freeze avoidance rather than freeze tolerance. They are manipulating their own thermodynamics to prevent ice formation entirely.
That is just a remarkable evolutionary response. Okay, let's flip to the other end of the spectrum. Facultative hibernation. If obligate hibernators are on a strict schedule, what drives these guys?
Facultative hibernators are your crisis managers. They only enter that deep torpor state when they're stressed, usually by the confluence of severe cold and food deprivation. They lack that spontaneous annual internal trigger.
They're just responding to immediate hardship.
Yeah.
And the chipmunk is the perfect example here, right? If it has enough food stashed away and the winter isn't too bad, it might just sleep for a long time without ever truly entering that radical metabolic suppression.
That's the key distinction. It might just be slowing down a bit, but that deeper state is only initiated when the energy balance calculation tips decisively against survival.
When it hits the emergency shutdown button.
Right. And we see this evolutionary divergence even in close cousins, which really helps clarify the definitions.
Oh, give us the comparative example.
So consider prairie dogs. The white-tailed prairie dog is an obligate hibernator. It's programmed annually for the deep state, regardless of food stores.
Okay.
But the closely related black-tailed prairie dog is purely facultative. It might experience torpor, but it only initiates a sustained, deep metabolic shutdown if it is severely cold-stressed and facing starvation.
Wow. Two species, neighbors, using entirely different survival strategies.
Driven by different evolutionary pressures.
That distinction, programmed versus reactive, gives us the perfect foundation for discussing the rule breakers. Because the next two case studies force the entire scientific community to rethink what hibernation actually is. Let's talk about bears.
For decades, the black bear and the brown bear were excluded from the true hibernator club.
Why? I mean, it's a huge animal that sleeps through winter. That sounds like the definition of hibernation to me.
The skepticism was entirely based on that outdated temperature criterion. In obligate rodents, the body temperature drops by, 32 degrees Celsius or more.
Yeah, a huge drop.
A huge drop. Bears, however, only experience a modest decline, typically 3 to 5 degrees Celsius. They stay relatively warm, hovering around 30 to 34 degrees. So early researchers argued they were just in a state of deep winter torpor, not a true physiological shutdown.
So the community missed the forest for the trees. They were looking at the thermometer instead of the metabolic rate.
Precisely. And that theory was decisively refuted by research in 2011 and 2016. Scientists realized that while the temperature drop wasn't dramatic, the active metabolic suppression was absolutely profound.
How profound?
They were actively reducing their energy expenditure by about 75% compared to their summer resting rate. This active regulated hypometabolism became the new defining characteristic.
And the physiological achievements that go with this. They're like biological miracles. They solve problems that plague humans in space or in bed rest.
They truly become self-sustaining recycling units. Take nitrogen waste. If a human stopped urinating for months, toxic urea would build up and be lethal.
Right.
Bears, however, recycle their proteins in urea. They effectively shut down the urination process for months, converting urea back into usable amino acids.
I mean, how do they do that? Is it a liver function?
It's complex. It likely involves specific liver enzymes and, perhaps most fascinatingly, specialized gut bacteria that aid in breaking down and recycling those nitrogen compounds.
So this recycling process, it prevents the toxic waste buildup and it fuels the synthesis of new amino acids.
Which is key to preventing the massive muscle atrophy that should occur from long-term inactivity. They aren't just passively surviving, they are actively maintaining their structural integrity.
And bone loss too, right? Osteoporosis, they avoid that completely.
Entirely circumvented. A human bedridden for months suffers severe demineralization. Bears maintain bone density. Research has shown their blood serum actually inhibits the activity of osteoclasts, the cells responsible for dissolving bone tissue while they're hibernating.
So they're turning off the demolition crew for their own skeleton.
It's genetic regulation at a staggering level. They're strategically increasing essential amino acids in muscle tissue and regulating a specific suite of genes to limit muscle degradation. It's total internal homeostasis.
An engineering marvel. Now, that 2016 study on brown bears also gave us key insights into the triggers. How do they know when to start and when to finish?
That study tracked 14 brown bears over 3 winters, and it gave us the first clear chronology. The start of the denning period is driven by environmental cues, snow arrival, and the ambient temp dropping to around 0 Celsius.
Okay, so the environment kicks it off.
But, and this is key, the physiological slowdown, the drop in heart rate and metabolic rate, actually starts several weeks before they physically enter the den.
So the body anticipates the need for hibernation before the external conditions force the issue.
Correct. But the end of hibernation is purely physiological. Their body temperature starts rising 2 full months before they physically leave the den, completely independent of external cues.
2 months.
2 months. They're relying on an internal temperature threshold and a hormonal cascade to initiate arousal. They only finally emerge once the outside temperature exceeds their lower critical temperature.
So the bear is the living proof that you can achieve true hibernation, profound metabolic suppression without that radical temperature drop.
Which forced the scientific definition to pivot, a powerful redefinition.
Now, let's pivot from the cold, massive bear to the warm, tiny primate, the fat-tailed dwarf lemur. Before this discovery, the common wisdom was absolute. You needed a cold climate to hibernate.
And that discovery completely demolished that rule. The fat-tailed dwarf lemur is a tropical mammal, a primate, that hibernates in tree holes for up to 7 months of the year.
This is the real aha moment of the deep dive. If Madagascar winter temperatures can sometimes climb past 30 degrees Celsius, that's 86 Fahrenheit, then hibernation is not about escaping the cold. What's it about?
It's purely about resource scarcity. The Malagasy winter is the dry season. Food and water become extremely hard to find. The energy cost of actively foraging in a lean tropical dry season outweighs the energy cost of shutting down for half the year.
So they conserve energy by avoiding starvation, not avoiding freezing.
Precisely. And this lemur introduces another fascinating concept, passive hibernation.
What do you mean by passive?
Well, because the lemurs choose tree holes, the insulation quality varies wildly. If the hole is poorly insulated, the lemur's body temperature will passively follow the ambient temperature, sometimes climbing quite high during a midday spike.
So the lemur is passively fluctuating, but the key mechanism, the hypometabolism, is still happening regardless of a temperature spike.
Exactly. Even when its body temperature is relatively high, its metabolic rate remains drastically reduced. This forcefully reinforces the new definition. Hypometabolism is not necessarily coupled with low body temperature. The active ability to switch off metabolic functions is the core mechanism.
Whether you're a bear regulating at 30 degrees C or a lemur fluctuating at 25 degrees C.
The mechanism is the same.
That makes perfect sense. Okay, so mammals have shown us this incredible spectrum of active metabolic control. Now, let's broaden our lens and swiftly cover how dormancy works across the rest of the animal kingdom.
Moving to birds, they're generally too costly to keep warm. Their high metabolic rate for flight makes long-term hibernation virtually impossible. Most birds just use short overnight periods of torpor.
But there's one exception.
One spectacular exception, the common porwell, the only known bird to truly hibernate. It was first observed in a state of profound torpidity in the California desert and during long periods of metabolic shutdown, an extraordinary outlier.
Now, what about the ectotherms, reptiles, and amphibians? Their dormancy, or brumation, how does that differ technically from mammalian hibernation?
For ectotherms, their winter dormancy is called brumation. Unlike mammals, they can't actively downregulate their metabolism like a switch. Their metabolic rate slows primarily because the surrounding environment is cold, and their body temperature just tracks it.
So mammals trigger the shutdown physiologically before the cold hits, whereas ectotherms trigger the behavior to find the cold, which then slows their system down.
Precisely. They rely on the environment for the temperature drop. However, some ectotherms have evolved freeze tolerance. This is a terrifying but effective mechanism.
The ability to freeze solid and revive.
They synthesize cryoprotectants, essentially internal antifreeze proteins. They manage where the ice crystals form, limiting them to the spaces outside the cells. They also dramatically increase glucose in the blood, which acts as another powerful cryoprotectant.
So they're turning themselves into a frozen biological battery pack until spring.
It's an entirely different level of survival engineering. Then we have the arthropods insects, where seasonal dormancy is called diapause. This is interesting because of its extreme evolutionary plasticity.
What makes it so adaptable?
It has a massive amount of genetic variation, which allows it to evolve quickly, often in response to climate change. The sources outline that it evolved through 3 distinct stages. First, developing neuroendocrine control over bodily functions.
So getting the machinery.
Second, pairing that control to reliable environmental cues, like decreasing photoperiods. And third, linking these controls to internal biological timers. So the insect doesn't just react. It has an internal rhythm that allows it to prepare long before hardship arrives.
And finally, fish. Most of them don't actively hibernate, do they?
Most, like the cunner, save energy simply through inactivity coupled with cold temperatures. They're still, but they don't actively depress their base metabolic rate like a hibernating mammal.
But there are exceptions.
There are. In extreme conditions like the perpetually cold Antarctic or in low-oxygen environments, some fish do suppress their metabolism. In those cases, simple inactivity isn't enough.
Fascinating. So now let's shift the focus completely, because this is where the science of hibernation connects directly to the listener's world. The implications for human medicine and deep space travel.
This is the realm of induced hypometabolism, or as it's often called, suspended animation.
And the key mechanism seems to revolve around something called HIT proteins, hibernation induction trigger. What's the history there?
HIT proteins were first isolated from the blood of hibernating groundhogs. The idea was simple. If you inject blood components from a hibernating animal into a non-hibernating one, can you induce a similar state?
And the early attempts were promising, weren't they?
Initially, yes. But translating this to human applications was challenging. A 1997 study tried to use precursors of these proteins to increase heart tissue recovery during ischemia, a lack of blood flow.
And the outcome?
They were unable to increase recovery rates for human heart tissue at that time. Isolating and safely administering a complex cocktail of molecules from animal blood just proved too difficult for large-scale human trials.
So they hit a wall. How has modern bioengineering solved this?
Modern recombinant protein technology. Instead of relying on blood extraction, scientists can now identify the specific genes for these molecules and manufacture them in the lab. We can produce specific proteins like HP20, HP25 at scale and with high purity.
So they can test single targeted compounds instead of a messy biological soup.
Exactly. This allows for precise research without the ethical and logistical constraints of animal sourcing.
So what's the immediate, profound medical application here?
The primary goal is therapeutic hypothermia, temporarily putting critically ill or severely injured patients into a state of hibernation. Imagine a trauma patient with a severe brain injury. If you can slow their metabolism, You drastically reduce their oxygen demand and slow the progression of irreversible damage.
It buys the surgical team crucial time, hours, maybe even days. It could dramatically increase survival rates in that golden hour of trauma.
It could be truly revolutionary. And of course, there's the perennial science fiction goal, making deep space travel feasible.
Human hibernation is seen as vital for missions to Mars. Why?
The benefits are enormous. If astronauts are in suspended animation, their metabolic needs plummet. They require far less food, water, and oxygen. This means smaller, lighter, safer spacecraft.
And if we tie this back to the bear's ability to prevent muscle and bone loss?
You've got it. Induced hibernation could solve two of the biggest physiological problems of long-duration space travel: bone density degradation and muscle atrophy. The lessons from a hibernating bear's genetics are directly informing astronaut countermeasures.
This idea of humans intentionally shutting down, though, it's not just modern science. You mentioned a chilling historical precedent.
Yes. A 1900 report in the British Medical Journal described a practice called Lotska among Russian peasants in Pskov. Facing severe food scarcity, entire families would adopt a state of, well, cultural hypometabolism.
What did Lotska actually entail?
They would spend 6 months essentially sleeping clustered around the stove, dramatically reducing their activity. They'd wake up once a day for a small amount of bread and water. It was a conscious behavioral strategy to reduce metabolic cost to the bare minimum.
It shows the survival pressure to slow down is latent even in human behavior.
It connects to current anthropological research, too. Scientists are studying fossil evidence to see if hibernation might have been possible in early hominids. At sites like Atapuerca in Spain, where ancestors faced extremely cold, resource-scarce periods, some form of seasonal shutdown might have been a critical survival strategy.
If that ability was in our deep past, it lends a lot of weight to the modern research trying to re-engage those genetic switches. Which brings us to the evolutionary timeline. When did this incredible mechanism become so widespread?
It's fundamentally a seasonal response. When the ancestors of birds and mammals moved from stable marine environments to dynamic terrestrial ones, they were immediately faced with intense seasonality. Hibernation, in its various forms, evolved as a crucial tool to manage those predictable pressures.
And the sources suggest it likely co-evolved right alongside endothermy itself.
Yes. The earliest suggested instance is in Thrinaxodon, a mammal ancestor from about 252 million years ago. As animals developed endothermy, the costly ability to generate internal heat, they simultaneously needed a mechanism to conserve that energy. It's thought the on-switch and the off-switch for heat regulation developed in tandem.
Okay, let's discuss the critical evolutionary constraint, size. Why do larger animals tend to lose the ability to hibernate?
This is a classic example of physics imposing an evolutionary filter: the surface area to volume ratio. Small animals have a very high surface area relative to their volume. They lose heat extremely quickly. For them, hibernation provides a massive survival advantage.
It's exponentially harder for a mouse to stay warm than a cow.
Exactly. As an animal gets bigger, that ratio decreases. It takes proportionally less energy for a large animal to maintain a high internal temperature. The energetic benefit of shutting down the whole system becomes marginal compared to the risk. The ability is often lost.
Which, again, makes the bear's ability to maintain that deep metabolic suppression despite its size such a phenomenal outlier.
It's an independent breakthrough in large mammal physiology. And we even see evidence that hibernation evolved multiple times, even within mammals, when you compare marsupials and placentals and how they develop the ability.
So let's summarize this incredible deep dive. We started by tearing up the index card that defined hibernation as simple cold sleep.
We established that it's defined by radical active metabolic suppression. Regardless of the temperature drop, we can view it as a continuous spectrum.
We learned that obligate hibernators, like the Arctic ground squirrel, maintain shocking sub-zero abdominal temperatures while still needing to perform metabolically costly periodic arousals, likely to catch up on sleep or patrol for disease.
And we saw how bears and the fat-tailed dwarf lemur shattered the old rulebook. Bears proved you don't need a massive temperature drop, and lemurs proved you don't need cold weather. Metabolic control is the sole determinant.
And crucially, this knowledge is driving critical human applications. Bioengineering these HIT proteins could revolutionize trauma medicine and make deep space missions to Mars logistically feasible.
The ability to temporarily turn off the aging and decay processes associated with a high metabolism is arguably the single greatest goal in biological research today.
It is truly a widespread, ancient, and highly adaptable survival strategy. Given that this state of controlled metabolic shutdown is so successful across so many life forms, what fundamental biological constraints are we still missing that prevent us from fully embracing human hibernation today? It leaves you wondering what ancient switch lying dormant in our own DNA we haven't quite figured out how to flip yet.
Something potent to ponder the next time you feel the need for a deep nap.
We will catch you next time for the next deep dive.
When you picture a casino, what flashes into your mind? Is it the dizzying light pollution of the Las Vegas Strip?
Right.
Maybe the golden sort of palatial complex of a Macau resort? Or perhaps the hushed elegance of a European gaming room?
We see the spectacle, don't we? But what we often fail to see is the industrial architecture that's really underlying that spectacle.
What do you mean by that?
Well, a modern casino is rarely just a place to gamble. I mean, it's an integrated leisure complex.
Right. It's got the hotels, the restaurants.
Exactly. Hotels, resorts, restaurants, luxury shopping, massive live entertainment venues. It's a carefully curated environment designed for one specific purpose.
To capture your attention.
Your attention and your capital.
Exactly. And today, we're going far beyond those flashing lights and neon signs. We're doing a deep dive into the very core of this global industry.
We're peeling back the layers.
We are. On three critical areas. First, the industry's surprisingly soft origins, the history and the etymology that completely clashes with its modern image.
And second, the cold, hard mathematics and the intense psychological engineering that ensures its success.
And third, and this is the one that really got me, the hidden, often shocking costs it imposes on society and the environment.
Yeah, our source material today takes us on a journey. We're going from, 17th century Italian society clubs all the way to the modern, multi-billion-dollar global market.
And we're going to reveal those subtle design tactics that are used to encourage play, the things you might not even realize are influencing your decision-making.
And the literal waste, the sheer volume of waste generated by this global leviathan.
Our mission is to take these disparate sources and synthesize them so you are well informed on everything that happens behind the gilded doors of these facilities.
We're talking about the house edge.
The spy hubs.
And yeah, the literal heavy metals in the electronic waste.
Let's start right at the beginning, because the very word casino has a history that is completely at odds with its current high-stakes meaning.
It really does.
The word casino, it sounds like it belongs on a list with baccarat and champagne.
Yeah.
It has this, air of European sophistication.
It does. But when you dig into the etymology, the origin is deceptively simple, almost charming.
Where does it come from?
It's entirely of Italian origin. The root is simply casa.
Casa, meaning house.
It's house, that's it.
Yeah.
And when the term first entered popular usage, say in the 18th and 19th centuries, it had no resemblance to a major gambling operation.
A house. That sounds, well, a lot cozier than the sprawling complexes we see in Macau or Vegas today.
Exactly. So what did these houses do?
Right. Was their function?
The original usage referred to a smaller building, a small country villa, a summer house, or a social club. Often it was built on the grounds of a much larger, stately Italian palazzo.
It was like an outbuilding.
It was a designated social annex. These buildings, the casino, were for civic or social functions. Places for dancing, listening to music, organizing balls, that sort of thing.
Hosting sports even.
Yes, exactly. A waltz, maybe a tennis match, not betting the family fortune on a turn of a card.
There's a perfect example of this in the U.S., isn't there?
There is. The Newport Casino in Rhode Island. It's an iconic complex built in the late 19th century.
And it was intended for social and sporting events.
Primarily. It hosted the first U.S. national championships in tennis, which, later became the U.S. Open. The architecture just maintains that original meaning of a social gathering place.
It's fascinating how context just completely changes meaning over time. But you mentioned an intriguing linguistic detail about the word in modern Italian.
Oh, this is a great point for anyone listening who speaks the language or is learning. In modern Italian, if you pronounce casino without the accent, just the flat, unaccented word.
Casino.
Right. It actually carries a very negative connotation. It can mean a brothel or a mess or just a noisy, confusing situation.
Like my room is a casino.
Exactly. The actual gambling house, the venue we're discussing, is spelled casino with an accent over that final O.
So in Italy, if you say you're going to the casino, you mean a high-end gambling establishment.
But if you say something is a casino,
You're saying it's a chaotic disaster. That tiny little accent mark really encapsulates the whole arc of the building's reputation, doesn't it?
it really does. It shows the tension between the regulated business and well, the social chaos it can sometimes create.
And we even see places where the name stuck, but the gambling part never actually arrived.
Yes, illustrating that early definition perfectly. The most famous example has to be the Catalina Casino on Santa Catalina Island in California.
And the Catalina Casino, despite its name and its grand scale, is famously not a gambling venue.
Correct. By the time it was built, games of chance had already been outlawed in California.
So what is it then?
It remains what it was built to be, a spectacular public building, an enormous ballroom, and a theater completely divorced from the gambling definition. It holds on to that 19th century meaning of a social house.
Before we move on to the gambling part, we should probably touch on the military usage.
Oh, right. Our sources highlighted that too. It also ties into that initial social function.
How so?
In Spanish or German military contexts, casino or casino often just refers to the officer's mess hall or a recreational facility.
So again, a communal house for social interaction.
Not for high-stakes wagering. It confirms the original intent. But now we have to move from the summer house to the first controlled experiment in modern gambling.
And that takes us to Venice in the 17th century.
It does.
Now, gambling itself, of course, is ancient. I mean, dice were found in ancient Mesopotamia, right? The Greeks, the Romans, they were all prolific gamblers.
Oh, absolutely. It's believed to have existed in nearly every society, right up through Napoleon's France and Elizabethan England.
So when does the specific concept of a controlled, dedicated gambling house actually emerge?
The first known European gambling house that operated under state sanction, even if it wasn't called a casino yet, was the Ridotto.
The Ridotto.
Established in Venice, Italy in 1638.
That's a fascinating historical landmark. Venice, 1638. Why? Why did the Great Council of Venice decide to set up a state-sanctioned facility? What was the motivation?
Control and management. Gambling was already pervasive, especially during the raucous carnival season.
So they figured if you can't beat them, join them, or at least regulate them.
That was the idea. The council established the Ridotto to provide controlled gambling, presumably hoping to generate some revenue while keeping the social excesses in check. It was a formal acknowledgement that, hey, this is an intractable part of public life.
But history tells us this initial venture was pretty short-lived, right?
Very much so.
Yeah.
Ridotto only operated for 136 years. It was closed down in 1774.
And the reason for its closure is, I think, the most telling part of this whole history.
I agree completely. The government shut it down because they felt it was impoverishing the local gentry.
Let's just stop on that for a sec. That is a profound historical pivot point.
It is.
The very first known state-sanctioned European gambling house was closed because the government recognized it was, well, too efficiently extracting wealth and harming the socioeconomic status of its own wealthy citizens.
It's a remarkable admission, isn't it? An admission of the underlying extractive nature of the whole enterprise. They realized that even in a highly controlled environment, the mathematical certainty of the house's profit was actively detrimental.
Detrimental to the public purse and the stability of the elite.
Which raises this fundamental, recurring question about the modern industry. Why were they willing to protect the gentry in 1774, but today, with a multi-billion-dollar industry operating on the exact same principles?
Those social protections are often completely absent.
The extraction mechanism hasn't changed, only our societal tolerance for it.
Okay, so let's shift focus to the United States. For much of early American history, where did gambling happen?
In the U.S., the early establishments weren't resorts. They were known as saloons.
Ah, the classic Wild West scene.
Exactly. Swinging doors, sawdust floors, three-card monte, backroom poker tables. They were particularly prevalent in the burgeoning Western territories and major transit hubs.
So places like New Orleans, St. Louis, Chicago.
San Francisco, during the gold rush especially, these saloons became crucial social and economic institutions. They provided lodging, drink, conversation, and a place to wager, centers of unregulated, high-risk chance.
And just like the Ridotto, American society eventually decided to try and shut this down.
That's right. The early 20th century saw a major regulatory shift, largely driven by temperance movements. Gambling was broadly outlawed across the U.S. through state legislation.
Which drove it underground for decades.
It did. And the history of modern casino culture really hinges on a single crucial moment of relegalization.
1931, Nevada.
That's the moment the state of Nevada, looking for revenue and economic development, legalized gambling statewide.
And that one decision directly led to the rise of Las Vegas.
The undisputed mother city of modern integrated casino culture. That legalization allowed the industry to move out of the backroom saloon and into the massive, high-finance corporate model we recognize today.
And of course, that model sought to replicate itself.
And it did. The next major hub appeared in 1976 when New Jersey followed suit, legalizing gambling in Atlantic City,
which quickly became the second largest U.S. gambling city,
competing directly with Vegas and creating a legal blueprint for other states that would follow suit decades later.
So we went from a social house in Italy to a controlled, failed experiment in Venice, to saloons, and finally to two major state-sanctioned hubs in the U.S.
And that entire history sets the stage for what is, at its core, a mathematical certainty.
Which brings us to the mechanics of modern operation.
Right. We need to move from history to the hard, inescapable reality. Beneath all the lights, the architecture, the hospitality. A casino is a sophisticated mathematics engine.
An engine built for profit.
The entire enterprise is structured from the ground up to generate profit using certainty, not luck.
This is where we define the immutable truth of the casino floor. Whether you're playing craps, baccarat, roulette, or blackjack.
While some games do allow for a minimal element of skill, like basic strategy in blackjack,
the vast majority just rely on chance. And that certainty is embodied by one key concept.
The house edge.
The house edge.
That's the core concept. The house edge is a mathematically predetermined advantage that guarantees the casino will make a profit over time. The expected value of any wager, from your perspective as a player, is uniformly negative.
You are statistically expected to lose money.
Or rather, the casino is statistically expected to keep a small percentage of every single dollar you wager. It's not cheating or manipulation. It's baked right into the rules of the game itself.
Let's use a concrete example to make this really clear for everyone listening.
Okay, a classic, easy-to-understand example is American roulette.
Right. The big wheel.
The wheel has 38 pockets. You have numbers 1 through 36, plus a single zero and a double zero.
0, 0.
Right. Now, if you bet on a single number, the payoff is 35-1. But if the game were truly fair, mathematically balanced, there should only be 36 pockets. That would make the odds even.
But the casino adds those two extra green pockets, the 0 and the 0, 0.
Exactly. Those two extra pockets, the 0 and 0, 0, are the house advantage, because the true odds of hitting any single number are actually 37-1.
But the casino only pays 35-1.
And that subtle difference means the house edge in American roulette is a whopping 5.26%. For every $100 you wager, the casino expects to keep $5.26 over the long run, no matter how lucky you are in the short term.
And in European roulette, which usually only has the single 0.
Right, 37 total pockets. The house edge there is closer to 2.7%.
So the difference between one green pocket and two more than doubles the house's mathematical certainty. That's how precise this is.
That precision ensures solvency. We should probably clarify the other essential terms, too.
Like payout.
Right. Payout is the percentage of total money wagered that is returned to players as winnings. If a slot machine has a 92% payout, the house mathematically keeps 8%. Simple as that.
And then there's the rake.
The rake is what the house takes in player versus player games, like high-stakes poker.
So the casino isn't even playing in that case.
Correct. The house doesn't need an edge. It simply takes a small commission, the rake, from every single pot. It's just a transaction fee for providing the secure, comfortable, controlled venue.
Now the comps, the complimentary items, the free rooms, the meals, the show tickets.
Those are just incentives. They're a purely data-driven marketing strategy, meticulously tracked through loyalty programs. They are not benevolence.
No, they're calculated losses designed to maximize the player's overall time spent gambling.
Which ensures the house edge has enough time to work its statistical magic.
And when we talk about maximizing playtime, we have to talk about the undisputed king of gambling revenue.
The slot machine, or video lottery machine, VLM.
The workhorses of the modern casino.
Absolutely. Our sources confirm they are one of the most popular and critically most profitable forms of gambling. And their psychological mechanism is, well, far more insidious than a game like roulette.
How does the VLM exploit player psychology in a way that table games don't?
It centers on two things: accessibility and reinforcement schedules. Unlike poker, slots require zero skill, zero social interaction, and provide immediate continuous feedback.
That continuous play feeds into something called variable ratio reinforcement.
Which is a psychological concept where the reward schedule is unpredictable.
And that unpredictability is the key, isn't it?
It is everything. Variable ratio reinforcement is the strongest driver of behavior in psychology. Think of a pigeon pressing a lever. If it gets a reward every time, it presses the lever predictably.
But if it gets a reward randomly,
sometimes after one press, sometimes after 20, sometimes after 300, it becomes completely addicted. It presses the lever continuously just in case the next press is the one.
and slot machines operate on that same random intermittent reward schedule.
To maximize engagement. And then there's the controversial feature known as the near miss.
Ah, yes.
Investigative reports have questioned whether the modern slot machine is inherently addictive because of this. The near miss is when the machine displays symbols that look almost like a win.
2 jackpot symbols, and the third one is just above or below the pay line.
Exactly. The system is designed to trigger the same neurological pathways as an actual win, even though it's a loss. It tells the player, "You were so close, just one more spin."
It's not just a mathematical loss. It's an engineered psychological illusion of proximity to success.
Keeping the player in that continuous flow state. And that brings us to the entire casino environment itself, which is also engineered.
Using sound, scent, and light.
Behavioral design is utilized at every single turn. Casinos intentionally control sound, odor, and lighting to bypass rational thinking and encourage impulsive, aggressive gambling tendencies.
Let's break down these sensory weapons, starting with sound. I always just thought the cacophony was randomness.
But the research shows it is meticulously orchestrated.
How so?
We can look at the work by MIT anthropologist Natasha Dowschule. She detailed how audio directors for major slot machine manufacturers actively engineered their soundscapes.
And what did they do?
They decided to make slot machines resonate in the universally pleasant tone of C.
The tone of C. Why that specific choice?
The intention was dual. First, to create a sound that pleased the ear, triggering positive associations. And second, crucially, they sampled the existing soundscapes of the casino floor to ensure the new slot sounds would not clash with the surrounding noise.
So it's designed to blend in, to be part of a harmonic drone.
A hypnotic drone. The overall effect is an acoustic environment of perpetual minor celebration. It pulls you into a state of continuous activity, preventing any harsh sounds that might snap you out of your flow state.
And make you conscious of the time or the money you're losing.
Exactly. It's acoustic immersion. But even more subtle and arguably more powerful is the use of scent.
The scent hook. It sounds almost dystopian.
Well, this comes from a study by Alan Hirsch from the Smell and Taste Treatment and Research Foundation. His team tested the impact of releasing a pleasant yet unidentifiable odor through the ventilation system near Las Vegas slot machines.
And the result was staggering.
It was. The pleasant subliminal odor generated approximately 50% more in daily revenue from those machines.
50% more revenue.
Compared to identical machines that operated without the scent.
Just from a subtle, pleasant smell that players couldn't even consciously identify. How did Hirsch explain that?
He suggested the scent acted as an aphrodisiac, but not in a romantic sense. Rather, it induced a heightened emotional state, causing a more aggressive form of gambling.
Making people more impulsive, less risk-averse.
And more willing to place large, rapid bets.
That's the real takeaway for you listening. You walk into this environment and every sensory input is the deliberate cue.
The clockless, controlled lighting, the sound tuned to a positive hum, a secret scent in the air encouraging recklessness. It's a perfectly calculated system, optimized for extraction.
And that efficiency is why the industry has reached the gargantuan global scale we see today.
That calculated design is what separates the modern resort from the 17th century ridotto. The house may still have an edge, but the means of exploiting it are now scientifically perfected.
And when we talk about that global scale, the sheer size of the operation is hard to comprehend. We're talking tens of billions of dollars annually.
And the geographic heart of the industry has decisively shifted.
Away from its spiritual home in the U.S.
The shift is monumental. While Las Vegas remains the cultural touchstone, Macau, the special administrative region of China, has firmly surpassed Las Vegas. It is the largest gambling market in the world by total revenue.
That dominance just underlines the massive volume of high-roller gambling coming from Asia. I mean, to give some context on the corporate scale, our sources cite data from a decade ago showing just the top global operators generating nearly $55 billion combined.
And leading that charge, even back in 2011, was SJM Holdings Ltd., based primarily in Macau, generating $9.7 billion.
Followed by Las Vegas Sands and Caesars Entertainment.
But SJM's lead just shows how critical that Asian market is.
So let's focus on the geographic concentration of that money, starting with the American landscape.
The United States is unique because it holds the largest number of physical casinos globally, over 1,000.
And some form of gambling is now legalized in 40 different states.
This widespread adoption is driven by interstate competition. States legalize it not just for revenue, but because they fear losing tax dollars to neighboring states that already have casinos.
It's a race to capture local leisure dollars. But despite that spread, the revenue is still heavily concentrated in the traditional hubs.
Oh, absolutely. The Las Vegas Strip is still the most powerful market in the U.S. In 2022, the Strip alone brought in $7.05 billion.
Followed by Atlantic City and the Chicago region.
Right. But beyond those commercial hubs, we've also seen the significant rise of Native American gaming.
That's a crucial driver.
It is. Native American gaming, under the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act, has become a massive economic force, providing casinos and resorts outside of legacy locations like Nevada and New Jersey.
So Vegas is the historical heart, but Macau is the financial engine. What specifically allows Macau to keep that dominance?
Macau benefits from its unique political status and its proximity to mainland China and Hong Kong. It became the favored destination for high-net-worth individuals from the region.
And it also houses just monumental sites.
Like the Venetian Macau, which our sources confirm is currently the largest casino in the world.
When we look at rising markets, Singapore often comes up. What makes their model distinctive?
Singapore is fascinating because it opted for a highly restricted market. There are currently only 2 casinos, both foreign-owned, but the country focused on drawing maximum impact through architectural spectacle.
With Marina Bay Sands.
That's the one. It's legendary for its boat-shaped sky park.
And the cost of that single venue is just staggering.
It is. At $6.8 billion, Marina Bay Sands is the second most expensive standalone casino property ever built. That investment immediately positions Singapore as a high roller destination.
Let's pull back and touch on some of the signature European sites that shaped the glamorous perception of the casino long before Vegas. Monte Carlo is the obvious starting point.
Monte Carlo, operating since 1865, is the embodiment of old-world, sophisticated gambling. Its architecture and history make it a visual shorthand for high-stakes intrigue.
Which is why it's inseparable from the James Bond universe.
Absolutely. It was the setting for scenes in GoldenEye and Never Say Never Again. But its fame goes beyond that. It inspired the 1891 music hall song The Man Who Broke the Bank at Monte Carlo,
celebrating the English trickster Charles Wells,
who famously managed to break the bank repeatedly on his trips.
Breaking the bank. That is the fantasy, isn't it? Beating the odds.
It is. But shifting to a completely unique European example, the Casino di Campione in Italy.
Its origin is completely unlike anything else we've discussed.
It truly is. The Casino di Campione is not in mainland Italy, but in a small Italian enclave called Campione d'Italia, located entirely within Switzerland.
And its founding in 1917 during World War I was for military intelligence.
A spy hub disguised as a gambling house. That is cinematic.
It really is.
It was founded specifically as a site to discreetly gather information from foreign diplomats passing through neutral Swiss territory. The gambling was a cover and a magnet.
And its economic function today is still highly unusual.
It's the sole economic driver for the enclave. Its income is sufficient to operate the entire territory of Campione Italia without imposing any local taxes.
Wait, really? No local taxes?
None. The casino literally pays the bills for the entire municipality.
Wow. So in that one small slice of Italy, the house edge is so reliable that the profit replaces the entire municipal tax base.
It's an extreme example of the economic power of the model.
One final famous spot then, Casino Estoril in Portugal.
The largest in Europe by capacity, and its fame is entirely tied to international conflict.
This one ties back to James Bond too, correct?
It does, but in a deeper, more fundamental way. During World War II, neutral Portugal became a haven for spies, dispossessed royals, wealthy adventurers.
And Casino Estoril was their primary gathering point.
It was. And that wartime atmosphere, the high-stakes games played out against a backdrop of global conflict, served as the direct inspiration for Ian Fleming's very first novel,
Casino Royale.
the book itself.
So the casino has always been intertwined with high-stakes human drama. But now we have to transition to the reality that supersedes that drama.
Yeah.
The massive unseen costs.
The costs that are accumulated long after the doors close for the night.
We've established that the casino is a hyper-efficient system of extraction, and protecting that system requires an equally hyper-efficient security apparatus.
Security is a multi-layered, multi-million-dollar operation. It's split into two domains: the uniformed physical security force on the floor,
And the specialized surveillance department, the mythical eye in the sky.
right. That department operates the entire closed-circuit television system, monitoring every table, every transaction, every facial expression.
How long has this intense digital surveillance been the standard?
It's surprisingly modern. The first big step toward total digital coverage was in 1989 with the opening of the Mirage in Las Vegas.
The Mirage.
It was the first casino to use cameras full-time on all table games, and that set the industry standard.
And alongside the CCTV, there are still physical relics of older security methods.
Yes. Some casinos still have the catwalks tunnels high above the floor, where personnel can look directly down onto the tables through one-way glass.
And the mandatory rules of conduct, like requiring players to keep their cards visible.
Those are fundamental security measures. They're designed purely to prevent cheating, detect card counting, and maintain the integrity of the game.
Because if the house edge is compromised, the entire business model collapses.
Security is simply protecting the mathematics.
Okay, let's pivot to a topic the glamour completely obscures. The massive and unique environmental costs this industry imposes.
This is a truly shocking element of the industry's efficiency.
When you think of a resort's waste, you think of plastic bottles, maybe food waste, but the actual gambling equipment turnover is astronomical.
It is. The rapid replacement of equipment isn't about product failure. It's a security measure that creates vast volumes of specialized waste. Let's start with playing cards.
A single deck of cards is used for how long before it's destroyed?
Only 2 to 4 hours.
2 to 4 hours.
That's it. The sheer volume of hands dealt, plus the risk of players mocking or tampering with cards, means the useful lifespan is extremely short. Then the cards are canceled, a hole punched through them, or the corners cut and discarded.
And recycling them is difficult.
Very. Most professional cards are plastic-coated paper. That mixture of materials and chemical coatings makes them very difficult and uneconomical to recycle compared to standard paper.
And the dice are replaced even more frequently.
Yes, dice are replaced approximately every 8 hours. They have to be perfectly balanced and unmarked.
And on a global scale, that adds up.
Staggeringly. Our sources note that globally, casinos contribute 70% of the over 500,000 dice cups that are discarded annually.
Just a huge volume of high-quality plastic and acrylic being manufactured and discarded daily for security.
But the largest environmental hazard comes from the intelligent equipment itself. The technological arms race in slot machine development is accelerating the e-waste problem.
It's a significant driver of hazardous waste.
The replacement cycle for intelligent equipment, slot machines, electronic tables has shortened dramatically. It's moved from 5 or 6 years down to just 3 or 4 years.
And why is that accelerating? Is it just for better graphics?
It's a few factors: regulatory upgrades like new anti-money laundering tech, technological iterations like VR components or blockchain integration, and just the simple pressure to offer the newest, most psychologically compelling product.
Which means mountains of electronic waste are being generated at an accelerated pace.
Globally, the industry generates over 100,000 units of discarded electronic equipment every year.
And this is serious hazardous waste.
It is. Circuit boards and electronic components contain heavy metals, lead, mercury, cadmium. If not processed properly, they can leach out, polluting soil and water.
And the plastic casings themselves take centuries to degrade.
Standard ABS plastics can take 500 years. So the hidden operating cost is, quite literally, environmental toxicity and centuries of non-degradable waste.
That truly casts a dark shadow over the glamorous surface. Finally, let's discuss the clear links between the casino industry, organized crime, and crucial public health issues like addiction.
The historical links to organized crime are well documented. Early Las Vegas was significantly dominated by the American mafia. In Macau, for decades, triad syndicates have been deeply involved.
But moving beyond those large-scale operations, what is the impact on a local community when a major casino opens?
Police reports and sociological studies indicate a consistent, clear correlation.
Which is?
The local incidence of reported crime often doubles or triples within 3 years.
Doubles or triples. That is a massive external cost that the community has to bear.
It is. And it's primarily property crime and white-collar fraud. The increased flow of cash, the presence of vulnerable individuals, the pressure of debt. It creates a conducive environment.
But most importantly, the increase is linked directly to problem gambling.
Exactly. The link between addiction and criminality. A crucial U.S. Department of Justice report examined this. They found the percentage of problem or pathological gamblers among arrestees was 3 to 5 times higher than in the general population.
That statistic is undeniable. The addiction fuels a desperate need for funds, which often leads to criminal behavior.
And we also have to consider the occupational health risks for the people who work inside these environments.
The dealers, the pit bosses, security, what risks do they face?
Specific and significant ones. Firstly, despite regulations, many venues still permit smoking, leading to a greater risk for cancers from secondhand smoke exposure.
And secondly,
musculoskeletal injuries, dealing cards, racking chips, standing for hours. These are highly repetitive motions, often resulting in repetitive strain injuries affecting the wrists, hands, and back.
so the hidden costs just keep piling up. Local crime, hazardous waste, and the physical toll on the workers. It really redefines the cost of admission for society at large.
If we synthesize our takeaways from this deep dive, the core irony of the modern casino is just unavoidable.
We started with the words soft origin casa, a small house for civility.
And we ended with a sophisticated, psychologically controlled, and environmentally devastating global industry.
We've tracked its evolution from the Ridotto, which was shut down because the government feared it was impoverishing the local gentry.
And now we operate in a multi-billion-dollar economy where every single factor, the math, the sea tone in the soundscape, the scent in the air, the waste of plastic cards, is ruthlessly optimized for profit and extraction.
The efficiency is breathtaking, but that profit is inseparable from the scale of its external costs.
The e-waste with heavy metals, the acceleration of local crime, the occupational hazards.
So what does this all mean for the fundamental nature of the enterprise? Let's leave you with a final, provocative thought drawn from one of the most unique business models we encountered.
Consider the unique case of Casino Helsinki in Finland. It operates under a completely different directive.
What's that?
It is notable because it donates all of its profits to charity.
All of them. So this raises a crucial question for you, the listener, about the essence of the casino itself.
If the psychological mechanisms and the mathematical house edge remain exactly the same, the machines are still tuned to see, the expected value for the player is still negative, the risk of addiction still exists.
But the destination of the profit is completely changed, from corporate balance sheets to public good.
Is the true impact and sociological harm of a casino defined more by who profits from it? Or is the inherent risk built into the very design and mathematics of the operation enough to define it as a fundamentally problematic institution, regardless of where the money ends up?
What happens when profit is entirely removed from the equation? Is it still a socially problematic institution, or does the charitable outcome redeem the inherent risks?
Something to mull over.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive beyond the neon.
I'll catch you next time. Welcome back to the Deep Dive, where our mission is to cut through the noise, stack up the sources, and deliver the essential insights you need to be truly well-informed. Today, we are tackling a really colossal concept, one that, dominates headlines, boardrooms, and military strategy sessions. We're talking about the Second Cold War.
Or Cold War II, or the new Cold War. It goes by a few names.
Exactly.
And it is perhaps the most contested and yet most pervasive geopolitical term of the 21st century. The sources we've gathered really describe this central tension as a period of, unprecedented strain.
So what are we actually looking at here?
We are examining a dual rivalry. It's pitting the United States and its key allies, particularly NATO, against a strengthening adversarial alignment involving both Russia and China.
Right.
And what's really crucial to get here is that in this new setup, Russia is basically seen as the successor state, the ideological and security inheritor of the old Soviet Union's role.
And for you, the learner, our objective here is absolute clarity. When commentators use this really dramatic language, are they speaking in a metaphor, or are they describing a true structural transformation of the global order? We need to unpack the evidence, identify the specific flashpoints, the economic ones, the military ones, and understand the profound academic skepticism that challenges the very use of this term.
That's exactly right. We find ourselves in the middle of a genuine debate. On one side, you have political leaders, some analysts, who deploy Cold War II as a direct predictive model. They're suggesting history is repeating itself.
Okay.
But on the other, you have some highly respected scholars who strongly discourage the term. They argue that the differences, especially global economic integration, make the comparison not only misleading, but potentially dangerous for policy.
So we are going to navigate that tension. Okay, let's unpack this. We've established that the phrase is everywhere today, but the concept of a new Cold War, well, ironically, it's not new at all.
Not at all. It's a recurring verbal shorthand for intense geopolitical conflict.
Right.
We see this phrase used repeatedly to indicate a spike in the global geopolitical temperature. Even during the original conflict, from 47 to 91, commentators were already talking about its resurgence.
So even back then?
Oh, yeah. Take 1955. The U.S. Secretary of State, John Foster Dulles, used New Cold War to describe the shifting nature of the Soviet threat, which suggests the term historically means the conflict we thought was settled, or at least managed, is now flaring up again.
And it popped up again, what, 2 decades later, when that supposed thaw détente clearly failed?
Yes, and it became a political weapon then. The columnist William Safire, writing in the New York Times in 1975, he used Cold War II explicitly to argue that the Nixon administration's policy of détente had totally failed.
So it was a rhetorical tool.
Yes, a rhetorical way of telling the U.S. establishment, wake up, the threat is back, and we need to return to a more aggressive posture.
And that pattern, using the term to signal a return to hostility, that seems to be the constant here. We even see academics applying it, in hindsight to the conflict's later chapters.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Figures like Fred Halliday, Noam Chomsky, they would use these terms to refer to that period of renewed tension, starting with the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in 1979.
And running through the Reagan years.
Exactly, through the massive U.S. defense buildup in the mid-'80s. So this gives you, the listener, a foundational understanding. The term Cold War describes an enduring rivalry, but adding new or second signals a specific phase of dramatic intensification after things had calmed down a bit.
A temperature spike. So when did this current rivalry, the one focused on Russia and China, when did that start getting its first serious foreshadowing after the Soviet Union was gone?
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, because we have a piece of political prophecy that is almost unsettling in how accurate it is. This is the Kennan Warning of 1998. George Kennan, famous as the intellectual architect of the original U.S. containment strategy, the man whose pseudonym X defined American foreign policy for a generation, he spoke out, and he spoke out vehemently, against NATO expansion.
And what was the specific action he was against?
He was focused on the U.S. Senate vote to expand NATO to include Poland, Hungary, and the Czech Republic. Kennan described this move as, and I'm quoting, the beginning of a new Cold War.
Wow, he said that in 98.
He did, and he didn't just warn of friction. He made a direct prediction. The Russians will gradually react quite adversely, and it will affect their policies.
Yeah.
He felt that expanding a military alliance eastward was a violation of Russia's core security interests.
That's deeply unsettling, given that the tensions he predicted centered on NATO expansion are the exact tensions driving the conflict now. So if he was so influential, so prophetic, why did Washington just ignore him? What was the counterargument?
That's a critical question.
Yeah.
And it really speaks to the hubris of the post-Cold War era. The counterargument was, well, it was multifaceted. First, there was a sense of historical justice.
Right, for the Central European nations.
Exactly. They demanded protection after decades under Soviet domination. For them, NATO was a guarantee of their sovereignty. Second, and maybe more cynically, you just had this prevailing atmosphere of triumphalism in Washington.
The we won attitude.
Precisely. The belief that since the U.S. had won the Cold War, it could set the new rules, and Russia, being weak, would just have to accept them. Kennan saw that as incredibly short-sighted.
So the foundations for this conflict were laid by a conscious policy choice. It wasn't an accident.
Not at all. And for a brief period in the early 2000s, that focus shifted entirely. We had the term momentarily hijacked by a different kind of global challenge.
I remember this post 9/11.
Yes, immediately after. Foreign policy experts James Lindsay and Ivo Dalder used the term to describe counterterrorism efforts as the new Cold War. The ideological enemy was no longer a state, but, non-state actor, radical Islamic terrorism.
But that usage didn't really stick.
No, it didn't, because the conflict just lacked the clear territorial, economic, and military symmetry you need for a true Cold War comparison. But it does highlight our tendency to frame massive long-term threats in familiar historical terms.
But the structural tensions that Kennan had identified, they never really went away, did they?
No, they simmered, and the focus returned sharply to Russia after the 2008 Russo-Georgian War. That was seen as Russia testing the post-Soviet boundaries. A British journalist, Edward Lucas, for instance, declared way back in 2008 that a new Cold War between Russia and the West had already started.
So for some, this has been going on for well over a decade.
That's right. It's been visible just beneath the surface of diplomacy for a long time.
Okay, let's fast forward to the contemporary usage, which dramatically raises the stakes and the complexity. The original Cold War was fundamentally bipolar, US and USSR, Iron Curtain. But this modern version is described as multilateral, with China and Russia often grouped together against the US and the West. It's a much more intricate global chessboard.
That multilateral dimension is absolutely key. If the US-Soviet conflict was a two-person chess game, this is like a three-dimensional board where the two main antagonists, China and Russia, are cooperating against a Western-led order.
And China initially didn't even like this framing.
Not at all. They resisted the Cold War narrative entirely. They saw it as unnecessary Western provocation.
But that changed around 2016. What specific U.S. actions caused Beijing to start using the phrase New Cold War themselves?
There were two major geopolitical moves that Beijing interpreted as direct threats. First was the U.S. plan to deploy the Terminal High Altitude Area Defense System, or PA, in South Korea.
And the U.S. claimed that was just defensive against North Korea.
That was the official line. But China and Russia saw it very differently. VI's advanced radar can penetrate deep into their airspace, essentially monitoring their missile launches and national security activities.
So it wasn't the missile interceptor itself, but the radar, the intelligence gathering.
Exactly. It was a strategic encroachment. The second flashpoint was U.S. support for an international tribunal ruling against China, favoring the Philippines in the South China Sea.
Okay.
Beijing saw that as direct interference in its sovereign maritime disputes. After those two things happened in quick succession, the phrase New Cold War started popping up all over Chinese state-controlled media. It was a signal they had accepted the framework of adversarial competition.
And that connection is so key. If U.S. power projection in the Pacific triggers that kind of response, how does that tension translate into the global marketplace? Because this isn't just military deployments, it's about fragmenting the global economy we've built over the last 30 years.
And this is why global financial bodies are issuing such stark warnings. The economic stakes are just astronomical. It affects investments, supply chains, prosperity for everyone. The IMF has been particularly vocal.
I remember the scale of that prediction. It was truly staggering.
It was. In December 2023, the IMF's Bita Gopinath warned that deepening fragmentation between the two power blocs, so the U.S.-European allies versus China-Russia, could lead to Cold War II.
And she put a number on it.
She did. She quantified the risk. This division could risk a potential loss of up to U.S. $7 trillion in global GDP.
$7 trillion. I mean, just to put that in perspective for you, that is roughly the combined annual GDP of Germany and the UK.
You're talking about wiping out the economic output of two major industrialized nations.
So what's the mechanism for that loss? How does that happen?
The mechanism is the destruction of efficiency and trust. Fragmentation means you lose comparative advantage. When companies can no longer source the cheapest, most efficient components, say semiconductors from Taiwan or batteries from China, because of geopolitical risk or export controls, they have to reshore or friendshore production.
Which is just less efficient.
It's redundant, it's less efficient, and it leads to higher costs, higher inflation, reduced investment, and a worldwide productivity slowdown. The world just cannot afford that clean economic break.
That scale of potential damage must force nations that aren't in the two main blocs to really hedge their bets. It sounds a lot like the return of neutrality.
It does. It leads us directly to this idea of a non-aligned movement 2.0. James Traub observed that the reaction of democratic countries in the developing world to current tensions strongly mirrors the original Cold War's NAM.
Right, the bloc of developing nations that refuse to side with either the U.S. or the Soviets.
Precisely. They are pursuing economic pragmatism today. And this forces the major powers into a desperate scramble for influence. For instance, in July 2022, you saw France, the U.S., and Russia all scheduling high-level diplomatic visits in Africa almost at the same time.
A clear proxy battle for soft power.
Exactly. For infrastructure deals, resource access, it was explicitly reported as a new Cold War competition for influence.
And what's fascinating is the strengthening of the cooperation between China and Russia in this new context. They seem to be acting as a coordinated counterbloc.
They do. The sources really highlight that the China-Russia relationship has grown stronger under pressure, not weaker. A June 2024 article by Professors Mayer and Kowalski details that Xi's China is expected to, quote, fully back Putin's effort to threaten and undermine Western liberal democratic states.
Which raises a huge alarm for European security.
A massive alarm. The implication is that for Europe, the threats from China and Russia are now inextricably linked. The old strategy of just, seeing China as a trade partner while focusing security on Russia is suddenly a huge liability.
So that old model is broken.
According to these analysts, absolutely. Mayer and Kowalski strongly criticized Europe for what they see as a dangerously outdated strategy. They said Europe's tripartite approach to China as its partner, competitor, and rival is woefully outdated because it lacks a security angle altogether.
That is a direct challenge.
It is. Their advice was that Europe must acknowledge and address China's robust ties and material support for Russia's aggression, especially in Ukraine. This structural alliance is perhaps the biggest single difference from the first Cold War, where the Soviet Union and China had that famous, bitter ideological split.
Let's zoom in now on the U.S.-China relationship, which often gets called its own conflict, the Pacific Cold War. We saw the rhetoric escalate sharply during the Trump administration.
It did, fueled by the view that China was an existential threat to U.S. global leadership. And that early speculation prompted the CIA to conduct a focused assessment on China's long-term strategy under Xi Jinping.
And that assessment was delivered in July 2018 by Michael Collins. He called it a quiet kind of Cold War. What did he mean by quiet?
Collins clarified that China wasn't looking for a direct, kinetic military fight. It wasn't interested in a Soviet-style tank buildup. Instead, China was seeking to replace the U.S. as the leading global power through, his words, other means.
And those other means are things like infrastructure.
Massive infrastructure investment, like the Belt and Road Initiative, diplomatic leverage, influence operations, and most critically, comprehensive technological dominance, often through state-sponsored IP theft.
So if China's goal is replacement, not confrontation, does that make it harder to deter than the Soviet Union was?
It fundamentally changes deterrence. I mean, how do you deter an economic weapon? How do you prevent espionage in the digital domain? The Soviet Union presented a clear military threshold. China operates in the shadows, making the conflict non-kinetic and chronic rather than acute. The historian Niall Ferguson, writing in January 2020, he really elaborated on this. He characterized this conflict as primarily economic rather than military, with its central focus on technology.
Right. Technology is the entire game now.
It is. Once the Phase 1 trade deal shifted the focus from tariffs, the conflict really metastasized into a technology race. This is not about building more missiles. It's about controlling the underlying infrastructure of the 21st century.
So we're talking about semiconductors, AI.
Semiconductors, quantum computing, artificial intelligence, and global data flows like 5G networks. The U.S. weapons in this new conflict are not bombs. They're export controls, sanctions, and blacklists aimed at depriving China of the components it needs to achieve technological superiority. This is the new economic warfare.
When the Biden administration took office in 2021, the diplomatic language seemed to soften a bit.
It did, on the surface.
Yeah.
In November 2021, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan confirmed the U.S. was not seeking a new Cold War with China. Instead, he was pursuing a policy of seeking a system of peaceful coexistence.
And that was a significant shift.
A vital diplomatic shift. It signaled that the U.S. was dropping its decades-long policy of trying to seek system change within China. Instead, the U.S. accepted the rivalry and just aimed to manage the competition safely, to minimize the risk of collision.
But the tension is still there because of economic realities that didn't exist in the first Cold War, that sheer level of integration.
And this is the essential counterargument to the whole Cold War II analogy, and it's a powerful one. Ferguson highlighted that unlike the Soviet Union, which was largely cut off from the West, the U.S. is so intertwined with China that the whole concept of decoupling is, in his word, a delusion.
Right. It's not two separate systems anymore.
No, the world economy is not two separate computer systems, which the U.S. and USSR were. It's more like a single complex computer, where the critical memory chips and motherboards are manufactured by your rival.
Which makes a clean break economically crippling for both sides.
Absolutely. The global supply chains run right through China. U.S. financial institutions are deeply invested there. And on top of that, U.S. allies are, well, they're not exactly jumping to pick a side against Beijing when their own economic growth depends on that Chinese market.
So that prevents a clean break.
It makes the conflict inherently messier and harder to prosecute than the original Cold War.
Despite the economic foundation of this conflict, there remains a terrifying military flashpoint that could instantly turn this quiet Cold War hot.
Taiwan. This is where the risk factor just spikes dramatically. The historian Alfred W. McCoy issued a dire warning in October 2024 about the geopolitical consequences of a confrontation over Taiwan. He warned that if China were to successfully impose a crippling embargo of Taiwan, the U.S. military risked losing its entire forward strategic position in the Western Pacific.
The so-called First Island Chain. Can you explain what that is and why losing it would be so devastating?
The First Island Chain is the geographic line that runs from the Kuril Islands down through Japan, Taiwan, and the Philippines. It's what allows the U.S. to project air and naval power deep into Asia, effectively guaranteeing the security of global shipping lanes.
I see.
McCoy warned that losing this chain would force the U.S. military all the way back to the second island chain in the mid-Pacific, anchored by places like Guam. This would effectively hand regional dominance and control over the world's most critical trade routes to Beijing.
An immediate shift in the global balance of power. And McCoy suggests this pressure is already creating cracks in U.S. alliances in Asia.
He does. He cited rising anti-American sentiment in the Philippines, driven by domestic politics, and significant opposition to the IEQ Security Pact. That's the agreement between Australia, the UK, and the U.S. among certain factions in Australia.
So our allies might not be as solid as we think.
It suggests that in the event of a severe escalation, the U.S.'s Asian-Pacific allies might not stand firm, making the security environment even more fragile.
Okay, so if the China front is the quiet, tech-driven economic wrestling match, the Russia front is the loud, kinetic, and highly volatile conflict. And it's primarily centered on Eastern Europe and the future of NATO. Many analysts seem to agree on a specific moment when this all really kicked off again.
Yes, the consensus among major analysts like Dmitry Trenin and Robert Legvold is that the starting point was 2014. This was the year Russia annexed Crimea and launched its intervention in eastern Ukraine.
And that just shattered the post-1991 settlement.
It completely shattered it, and crucially, it violated the Budapest Memorandum, which guaranteed Ukraine's territorial integrity in exchange for giving up its nuclear weapons. That action established a clear military and territorial component that is very different from the China rivalry.
And it wasn't just in Europe. By the mid-2010s, Syria became a classic proxy conflict.
A textbook example. You had the U.S. backing opposition groups and Russia providing essential military support to the Assad regime. It mirrored the proxy battles from Angola to Vietnam that defined the original Cold War.
The situation got so dangerous that in April 2018, the UN Secretary-General himself, Antonio Guterres, issued this extraordinary warning.
He told the UN Security Council that the Cold War was back with a vengeance. But the most alarming part of his assessment was the comparison. He suggested the dangers were even greater than the original conflict.
Even greater. Why?
Because the traditional safeguards and controls that existed to manage such a crisis, which were essential back in the 80s, he said they no longer seem to be present.
That is profound. He's saying we have all the rivalry, but none of the safety mechanisms. What specific safeguards was he talking about?
He was primarily referring to arms control regimes, diplomatic back channels, established rules of engagement for avoiding unintended clashes. In the 80s, the U.S. and USSR had crisis hotlines, detailed agreements on nuclear weapons, cultural exchanges. Today, those systems are largely dormant or just completely dissolved.
A rivalry without constraints.
Inherently more volatile.
Now, while 2014 was the start, many sources point to a later date for the true, crystallization of Cold War II.
Yes. For many journalists, like H.D.S. Greenway and Gideon Rachman, the 2022 full-scale invasion of Ukraine was the definitive, unmistakable start. It was a massive, conventional military action that cemented the deep, irreconcilable split between Russia and the West.
And this conflict is defined not just by tanks and soldiers, but by this expansion of what's called hybrid warfare.
Exactly. The Polish analyst Stanisław Kozer, writing in 2024, emphasized that this conflict employs a much bigger toolbox of hybrid activities. Hybrid warfare is essentially conflict that operates in the gray zone.
Gray zone.
Actions taken just below the threshold that would warrant a full military response or trigger NATO's Article 5, which defines an attack on one as an attack on all.
Can you detail some of those tools Cozier listed?
The list is extensive, and it's designed for maximum destabilization. It includes classic techniques like espionage and disinformation, but also more aggressive measures like sabotage of critical infrastructure within NATO states, cyber attacks, and deliberate airspace violations to test response times.
And some newer tactics as well.
Crucially, yes. It includes weaponized migration, using manipulated refugee flows to destabilize borders, and the ever-present shadow of nuclear blackmail, constantly reminding the West of the ultimate escalation risk.
And that gray zone reality, that must complicate NATO's response enormously. Because if a pipeline is sabotaged, it's hard to prove who do it quickly enough to mobilize a collective defense.
That is the strategic genius and the deep risk of it. It creates strategic ambiguity. It allows Russia to inflict pain and confusion on NATO members without crossing that clear line that triggers an Article 5 response. It's a constant low-level war of attrition.
And recently, the diplomatic rhetoric has hit a level of peril not seen since the height of the original Cold War.
The deterioration reached a historic low in July 2024. The flashpoint was the U.S. plan to deploy long-range conventional missiles, SM-6s, and Tomahawks in Germany. Russian officials, Putin, Peskov, they immediately seized on this, stating the situation was clearly reminiscent of the Cold War.
And what was the most extraordinary claim made then?
Diplomats claimed that bilateral relations between Russia and the U.S. were worse than during the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis. Peskov told a state-run TV reporter, "We are taking steady steps towards the Cold War. All the attributes of the Cold War with a direct confrontation are returning." Wow. And this isn't just hyperbole. It reflects a genuine acknowledgement by both sides that the systems for managing risk have fundamentally broken down.
But you also have analysts arguing the situation is already past the Cold War threshold.
That's a key nuance. Sabine Siebold, a senior European security correspondent, noted that while the dynamics suggest a new Cold War, in some ways it even feels hotter than the Cold War in the 80s.
Hotter.
She attributed it to two things. First, the war is raging directly on European territory, with Russian forces and Western-supplied weapons. And second, the collapse of virtually all arms control treaties. And even more dramatically, in October 2025, a Russian foreign ministry spokeswoman said there was no Cold War with NATO because it had already developed into a fiery conflict.
A fiery conflict. Okay, so we've established that the term Second Cold War is a useful label, but also a contested one. We've identified its dual nature. The quiet, high-tech economic struggle with China, running parallel to the fiery hybrid military fight with Russia. So now we reach the core question. How useful is the analogy, really?
Okay, let's synthesize what the academics say about the crucial similarities and then the even more important differences.
Let's start with the similarity.
The first and most grim similarity is, of course, nuclear deterrence, the shadow of mutual assured destruction, or MA.
Right.
The academic Barry Bazan pointed out that both eras rely fundamentally on MAD-8 to prevent a direct hot war between the superpowers. The knowledge that a full-scale confrontation means planetary annihilation imposes a crucial constraint. It forces the conflict into proxy wars or, hybrid gray zone activities. The fear is the same.
And the second key similarity is the ideological component. It's been redefined, but it's still there.
Absolutely. The first Cold War was communism versus capitalism. Today, the fault lines are defined by systemic competition. The historian Hope N. Harrison noted that Western leaders, like President Biden, have consistently framed the conflict as a fundamental battle between democracy and autocracy.
And what's the counter-narrative from Russia and China?
Well, Harrison notes that Putin supplies his own counter-narrative. He often frames the West as decadent, morally bankrupt, and trying to impose its values on traditional sovereign nations like Russia. So you still have this global schism framed in terms of competing political systems.
Okay, now let's pivot to the differences, because many analysts argue these are so profound that the term Cold War is actually a poor fit.
The differences are far more telling, particularly when you look at the power dynamics within the competing bloc itself. Niall Ferguson offered a very sharp assessment here.
How does he characterize that new power balance?
Ferguson argues that in this new Cold War, China is the undisputed senior partner. They are the dominant economic force. Russia, meanwhile, is relegated to the status of junior partner, or as he colorfully and critically put it, the mean little sidekick.
So it's a transactional relationship, not an ideological brotherhood.
Exactly. The core insight is that this adversarial bloc is highly asymmetrical and transactional, which fundamentally changes how the West can try to disrupt that alignment.
And he also distinguishes their political systems.
Yes. China, despite reforms, remained structurally loyal to Marxist-Leninist doctrine, state control through the Communist Party. Russia, under Putin, Ferguson argues, has definitively reverted to Tsarism, a nationalistic, orthodox imperial autocracy, not a return to Soviet communism.
So the partnership is based on a shared enemy, not a shared vision.
Precisely.
The second and most critical difference, which we've touched on, is that degree of economic integration. You really can't overstate this.
It is the defining feature of this new era. The modern conflict is characterized by far greater economic interdependence and centrality of network-based competition. This spans finance, production networks, infrastructure, and especially digital networks.
The idea of a complete, clean decoupling is just a delusion.
It is, because the world cannot afford that $7 trillion hit. The conflict is happening within a shared, deeply entangled global system.
So the economic weapons have to be precision-guided export controls, not sweeping tariffs that ruin everyone.
Exactly. You have to manage the competition without triggering a collapse that would damage your own financial system.
And the third, and maybe the most terrifying difference, goes back to that point Guterres made: global instability and risk management.
This Cold War is consistently described as much scarier by historians and security experts. Why? Because of the total disregard for diplomatic agreements and, crucially, the systematic collapse of arms control treaties that were the essential safeguards in the 80s.
Can you specify which treaties have collapsed and what the practical risk is now that they're gone?
Absolutely. The most prominent example is the INF Treaty, which prohibited the U.S. and Russia from having ground-launched missiles with certain ranges. The U.S. withdrew in 2019, citing Russian noncompliance. Another critical loss is the Open Skies Treaty, which allowed observation flights to build trust.
So the collapse of these treaties means we have a complete loss of transparency and predictability.
That is the practical risk. The previous Cold War, terrifying as it was, had systems built up over decades. Verification mechanisms, hotlines that reduced the risk of miscalculation. Today, those systems are gone. This lack of agreed-upon rules or off-ramps makes the current conflict inherently more volatile.
And finally, Ferguson noted a difference in the geography of the initial hot conflict.
He pointed out that in this Cold War II, the first hot war breaks out in Europe rather than Asia, referencing Ukraine. During the original Cold War, the early kinetic conflicts were peripheral proxy wars in Asia like Korea and Vietnam. The fact that the most violent conflict now is raging in the heart of global power means the immediate stakes are far higher for everyone.
So what does this all mean for us? We've seen the Second Cold War is a useful framework for understanding the return of this competition, but the structure is entirely new and dual. Economic and tech struggle with China, balanced against a military and hybrid confrontation with Russia.
The crucial takeaway is the complexity. The term Cold War II captures the ideological tension and the proxy conflicts, but it fails to capture the immense, paralyzing global economic integration that prevents a full split. You have to consider both the interconnectedness and the volatility at the same time.
And that brings us back to that stark warning from UN Secretary General Guterres. If the Cold War is indeed back, are we less prepared now than we were before? Because those necessary diplomatic safeguards, those arms control treaties, those crisis controls, they seem to be entirely absent. What profound implications does this lack of structured off-ramps hold for global stability?
That is the essential question to grapple with. We encourage you to consider how these parallel and often contradictory tensions, global economic fragmentation driven by tech rivalry, combined with military unpredictability driven by hybrid warfare and the collapse of controls, might force the global order to redefine itself in the years ahead. It's no longer a simple division, it's a globally intertwined high-risk competition where the rules are being written in real time.